So today we'll be completing the book Primitive Mythology by Joseph Campbell by reading the third part of the conclusion. The third part is called The Release from Bondage. In the period of the hieratic city-states, man's awe before the discovered order of the universe moved him to match that order in a mind, based on what he conceived to be celestial laws, which should bring into play in his own field of kama, artha, and dharma, the force of a superior principle. Comparably, in the earlier periods of the Paleolithic and Mesolithic gatherers, hunters, and primitive planters, a sense of awe before the closely watched wonders of the animal and plant domains had produced the mimes of the buffalo dance and the sacrificed seed. Through such half-mad games and plays, ordered human societies were constellated in which the mutually contradictory interests of the elementary and social urges were resolved. And the higher principle according to which they were thus resolved was not in any sense a function or derivative either of any one of them or of their combination, but an actually superior, superordinated principle, sui generis, which we have already seen illustrated in the round dance of Kohler's chimpanzees. That principle of disinterested delight and self-loss in a rhythm of beauty, which now is termed aesthetic and which used to be called more loosely spiritual, mystical, or religious. The biological urges to enjoy and to master, with their opposites to loathe and to fear, as well as the social urge to evaluate as good or evil, true or false, simply drop away, and a rapture in sheer experience supervenes, in which self-loss and elevation are the same. Such an impact is beyond words, for it is not such as can be explained by a reference to anything else. The mind is released for a moment, for a day, or perhaps forever, from those anxieties to enjoy, to win, or to be correct, which spring from the net of nerves in which men are entangled. Ego dissolved, there is nothing in the net but life, which is everywhere and forever. The Zen masters of China and Japan have called this state the state of no mind. The classical Indian terms are moksha, release, bodhi, enlightenment, and nirvana, transcendence of the winds of passion. Joyce speaks of the luminous silent stasis of aesthetic pleasure, when the clear radiance of the aesthetic image is apprehended by the mind, which has been arrested by its wholeness and fascinated by its harmony. The mind, he says, in that mysterious instant, Shelley likened beautifully to a fading coal. The impulse to art, the impulse to echo, through a chord, an apprehended order of beauty, underlies the grandiose formation of the archaic orders of society. And as we have seen, whole populations could be caught up in such a picture and given form, a new form, in which paradoxically all was surrendered and yet a heightened life was gained. We cannot suppose, however, that all who participated in the mime experienced its wonder in aesthetic terms. For the majority, its value must have been only magical, a power to produce the fruits of their three elementary orders of desire. And yet we cannot assume out of hand that there was none capable of disinterested wonder. For whence, then, would the rapture have sprung from which the social forms themselves derived? The words of our two Eskimo shamans, Igjurgarjuk and Najanek, have let us know that primitive man could bring his mind to rest in the mystery of the universe and therewith attain to a knowledge that can be justly called wisdom. His technical and scientific knowledge was limited to the horizon of his pitiful temporal community. But his wisdom, his enlightenment, his sense and experience of the mystery and power of the universe was of eternal worth. We have already pointed to the deep psychological cleavage separating the tough-minded, honest hunters from their feared yet indispensable, tender-minded shamans. We must now observe that for these two types, throughout the course of history, mythology and cult have had precisely opposite meanings, values, and effects. The benefits of religion for the majority have been primarily of the orders of Kama, Artha, and Dharma. The cult has served as a magical device to assure an abundance of food and youngsters, power over enemies, and the linkage of the individual to the order of his society. It has served, that is to say, as a means to engage him in the deshi, the local ethnic context, and has supplied in compensation assurance of a continuance of the goods of Kama, Artha, and Dharma beyond the grave. One's little offerings of finger joints, pigs, sons and daughters, or even of oneself seem to have meaning in a sort of mystical barter system, and one's peccadillos, missed by the police, can be counted on to eat from within like rats doing the work of the law. But then, perhaps on occasion, in the precincts of the temple, dancing ground, or some sacred site, the fleeting wisp of a sense of some mystery beyond, in the face of which all of this is trivial nonsense, may be experienced, and therewith, even if only for a second, the interest of the fourth end for which men may live will have been attained. The way of suffering of the shaman is the earliest example we know of a lifetime devoted to the fourth end, the serious use of myth hermetically as marga, as a way to the psychological metamorphosis. And the remarkable fact is that the evidence points irrefutably to an achievement, at least in many cases, of a perceptible amplification of the individual's horizon of experience and depth of realization through his spiritual death and resurrection, even on the level of these first primitive explorations. The shaman is in a measure released from the local system of illusions and put in touch with mysteries of the psyche itself, which lead to wisdom concerning both the soul and its world, and he thereby performs the necessary function for society of moving it from stability and sterility in the old toward new reaches and new depths of realization. The two types of mind thus are complementary, the tough-minded representing the inert, reactionary, and the tender, the living progressive impulse, respectively. Attachment to the local and timely, and the impulse to the timeless universal. In human history, the two have faced each other in a dialogue since the beginning, and the effect has been that actual progress and process from lesser to greater horizons, simple to complex organizations, slight to rich patterns of the artwork which is civilization in its flowering in time. Once this point is made, I think it speaks for itself. The dual service of myth is as contributory to the ends of Kama, Artha, and Dharma, and, on the other hand, as a means of release from these ego-linked obsessions, is now perfectly obvious. And that, in the latter service, it is functioning as art can hardly be denied. Can mythology have sprung from any minds but the minds of artists? The temple caves of the Paleolithic give us our answer. Mythology, and therefore civilization, is a poetic, supernormal image, conceived like all poetry in depth, but susceptible of interpretation on various levels. The shallowest minds see it in the local scenery, the deepest, the foreground of the void, and between are all the stages of the way, from the ethnic to the elementary idea, the local to the universal being, which is every man, as he both knows and is afraid to know. For the human mind, in its polarity of the male and female modes of experience, in its passages from infancy to adulthood and old age, in its toughness and tenderness, and in its continuing dialogue with the world, is the ultimate mythogenetic zone, the creator and destroyer, the slave and yet the master, of all the gods.